Welcome to episode 12 of Lizzie's Bedtime Stories. My storyteller this evening is Marissa Cohen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Liz. I'm happy to be here.
So, I hear you write reimaginings of fairy tales.
I do. I love that. And for me, when you're growing up, queer of any stripe, Disney just doesn't quite do it for you. At least it didn't for me. Like, I was always wanting, the tall, dark, handsome person who lived in the forest to be a tall, butch girl. So, so when I grew up, I started writing my own sort of fairy tales and versions of pop culture myths and versions of all kinds of myths, really. Mm-hmm. And I started writing the stories that I wanted to read. And that's just something that I love to do. And I like being able to show people an alternate window into something that's such a part of pop culture.
Have you seen on Facebook, sometimes they have like Ariel and Aurora or...
Yes, I have, and I think it's cute. And
Cinderella and Snow White.
Yes, but that said, that just never did it for me. I always wanted it to be like, the tall, dark, butchy girl. Like, if Eric from, Little Mermaid had been a girl, I would have been thrilled with my life when I was 11,
Yes, it's the book.
Yes.
And I feel you on that, because in terms of who I'm interested in as a lesbian, it runs the gamut from femme to butch. But for me, passing or something akin to that is just so hot. Like, I've read a lot of historicals where either they know that they're a woman but they're incredibly butch, or they're passing as a man.
And there are so many wonderful novels out there. Patience and Sarah by Isabel Miller, which is a lesbian classic, is one of my all-time favorites, and it really plays around with ideas of butch and femme, and one of the characters passes as a boy for a while on the road, and it's just, I love all that stuff. It's great. Yeah, on my list of favorites is The Spanish Pearl.
Yes,
Catherine Friend, I love her.
The Sword of the Guardian.
Those are my two most recent favorites that I've read.
I've read, Spanish Pearl so often, I literally have parts memorized.
There's a sequel, right?
Really? Oh, yes, I do. Yes, yeah. I do. Valencia?
Crown of Valencia, yeah.
Crown of Valencia.
Catherine Friend is really fantastic. She's just, I love her. And she actually also did you read Hit by a Farm?
No, I haven't, but I know she also writes children's stories.
She does, and I think she's such a cool example of being able to write across genres.
Exactly.
And I think of her and her partner as sort of like lesbian versions of the Fabulous Beekman Boys, like they're living on a cheap somewhere, but they don't have the press.
Oh, that is so much fun. Yeah. I love historicals. I love me some pirate. One area of historicals that just aren't out there are Renaissance. I would love to have like Renaissance historicals, like the whole shebang,
And then you're gonna love the story that I'm gonna be reading later on in the show. It's called Morgan and Jane, but it's very much about Renaissance and cross-dressing and lesbian butch femme and how two women could dare to get married in that time, because there are actual there are facts that we know of today that there were gay and lesbian ceremonies performed. There were like 2 or 3 of them that I found. And they actually happened. They're on the books.
Sweet.
So this isn't a new thing for us historically right now. We're just continuing stuff.
Well, yeah. There's sometimes that are more, there are more options, and Renaissance would be a time for that, as opposed to the Dark Ages or, the Crusades, that kind of stuff. Like, I would not want to be, Spanish Pearl. I would not want to mess around and cross-dress then. That was a highly dangerous thing. So, what fairy tale do we have first?
The first fairy tale we have was recently published in Wild Magazine, which is wildmagazine.org. It's in the spring 2013 edition, and it's called The Sea Stone. and it's a sort of a lesbian retelling of The Little Mermaid, and it's about a mermaid, selkie, Irish legend type creature who falls in love with a farmer, and they're having a long distance relationship, and it's all about how hard that is.
You're in the sea, I'm on the land. It's terrible.
Terrible.
All right, it's time to read your first story. So give it to us, Marissa.
The Sea Stone. The first time I go to visit, I see the piles of newly polished gemstones on her kitchen table. She's been collecting gems from the shoreline again. I'm only there 10 minutes, and the tear of my fins becoming legs already feels like impossible choice. One human foot longing to stretch from my water home to the land that she nurtures and lives on. I shift uncomfortably and focus on her. Take what you want, she tells me. I drop my backpack on the floor and pick a stone that is red with thick brown stripes along it. It is shaped like a kidney bean. It fits perfectly into the palm of my hand and seems to pulse like a heart. Of course that's the one you pick, she says. It reminded me of you from the first. Our connection is solid, but the long-distance part of us is murky, mysterious, already clogged with seaweed. But it is love that makes me hide my secret fins under rough jeans. It makes me ignore my slick black seal pelt, thick with the smell of fish and seaweed that I have ditched on her doorstep. I try to pretend that I am fast. I will not get caught between earth and water. It is her fate to be the sure one, the constant one. If she'd been born a fisherman in another time, she would have cast her nets into the ocean at precisely the same time each dawn, as though she could bring her strong will to bear against briny chaos. If that is her role, mine is to wrestle with all that happens in the space between the ocean and her arms. My body is unwilling to change from mermaid to human, yet I worry it will be no use. On the plane, I wipe ocean water from my legs in the tiny airline bathroom and take deep breaths, trying to breathe air on land now that I have left the sea. She tells me the story of how she found my red stone. I wanted it, but then it floated away, she tells me. The tide took it out. It washed away in sea foam. I knew I had to be patient, so I knelt in the water, and eventually it resurfaced and floated into my hand. That's just like her, to wait until nature yields, with her thick black boots stern against the water like an exclamation point, skimming between the rough sea and the shoreline, her black watch cap jammed over her fine hair, one ungloved hand in the sharp, clear water, planting her feet until connection finally reaches back for her. How is she to know that I have come to her dripping of another home? Even though gifts given from the sea should not be willingly kept, she reaches for me anyway. I ignore the pain throbbing in my human feet, take the stone from her, and raise my lips to hers, intent on being found. Don't look down, I want to tell her. My fins are not truly legs yet. Or perhaps I should say what I long to believe. Ignore the seal pelt dropped on your front porch. It is proof that I swam inland, all the way to you alone, not proof that I will go.
Aww. Poor thing.
Hard being a mermaid.
It's a hard knock life for us. Oh. Goodness. You know, I could see it flowering into a larger story. Have you thought about turning it into a novel?
I have with that particular one. I was playing around a lot with that. I really love the idea of the selkie, and that was something that isn't really mentioned in the story itself, but that's what's being alluded to when she's talking about the seal pelt and leaving the skin. Selkie is an Irish mythological creature. It's a creature who is part woman and part seal, and so the legend is that the seal. The woman inside the seal slips the skin, goes onto land, marries a human, and then eventually is driven back to the sea in some way or another. And I really love that image of sort of being caught between worlds and having two homes in a way.
Yeah, I read a historical, and I can't think of the name of it, which is terrible. But it had a selkie in it, and there was this one, the selkie, and it was partially lame because she was injured, but always that the woman on the shore was always looking for her to watch her dance with her other selkie counterparts and wishing that she could be a part of it. And while she's there, this awful man is a poacher and wants to steal her seal skin, and gets a hold of it, and the observer goes and steals it back from him, and gives him what for being on her land, because she runs the lighthouse. And so she's like, you better get off this land, and she starts, she gets the skin away from him and hides it. And then after she gets rid of him, she actually brings the skin in with her to her home and tries it on, and thinks of this the woman who it belongs to, and she has a love for her. And then it turns out that she actually is part selkie, that her father had partnered with one, and she decided to leave the sea to be with him, but was very unhappy. And then the choice is between staying on land and going out to sea, and the decision is made for her because her father, who was ill, and her brothers went away to war, I think World War I, when he passes, the only choice for her would be to marry. And so she's had this relationship with the selkie, and she loves her, but is not sure what she wants to do. And then when it looks like she's going to have that life, she has to make the choice between the sea and the land, and she chooses the sea.
I mean, I think that's... First of all, if you ever remember the name of that, please let me know.
Yes, I will. Actually, it's... Okay, folks, I decided that I did not want to deny you the opportunity of buying the book. So I looked for it, and the title is One Saved to the Sea by Cat, which starts with the C, Kingsgrave. And it was out in December of 2012, so it's still a new one. And it's a very thin volume, so if you only have a little bit of time to read, you can totally make that happen.
Ooh, that sounds yummy.
It is totally, exactly. It's perfect. You're going to be so happy. And of course, right. I ruined the story by telling the ending, but the story itself is awesome. So me being the evil spoiler girl, you're missing out on a lot of things, including some really saucy erotic content. Nice. Which you will discover on your own. And no, it's not too gratuitous, which, is never a problem for me, but it's sexy. It is sexy, and it involves the skin, wearing the skin.
That's really cool.
Okay, so we have a second story that you're going to be reading for us. Can you set it up, please?
Sure. The story is called Awake. It's a lesbian retelling of Sleeping Beauty. It's in between copyrights right now. It was published on gayflashfiction.com last fall, and then it was reaccepted to UF's Subtext Queer Arts magazine, and that's not out yet. That should be out sometime in the summer. But it's nice. It's really nice and very unexpected when a piece gets picked up twice back to back. It's just, you dream of that happening. Mm-hmm. So it was really, really
congratulations.
Nice to have that happen. Thank you. Okay, so it's called Awake. You existed. I knew it. I woke up and felt your kiss on my lips, and there were birds outside the window. My arms were sluggish, and I could barely lift my hands to wipe the centuries of sleep from my eyes, but I heard the birds crying before I saw them. The stone floor was much as it seemed before I pricked my finger and went to sleep, except for the large cracks. The witch is nowhere to be found. I can't see her in those first few moments as I wake, but I see you. You woke me from sleep, with the vines tangled outside the window and decades of cobwebs thick on my eyes. Outside my bedchamber, a lost generation stirs and wakes with me. Guards rub their salty eyes. Servants blink themselves awake in the dust mites of the kitchen. It's a strange world from which I wake, but stranger still is to find you kneeling by my bedside, your strong hands that have never seen the inside of delicate gloves, caressing mine. I never knew that a woman could be a prince before the day the spindle pierced my flesh. I hoped but didn't know how to tell my secrets. The witch knew, and she wished me to sleep, not from jealousy as tales would have you believe, but because she knew that secret and its power. She knew that women cannot only be princesses, but princes or kings. She can swing swords or slay dragons to reach her love. She knew, and she wished me to sleep away my own hidden knowledge. The witch never wanted you in my bedroom, but bless you, you found your way. You woke me from the strangest dreams. Images flash, memories of my ancient dreamscape. Women in male roles, women riding horses, climbing trees, women in trousers, women allowed to marry each other, although it was a time stranger and newer than this. This is a world that we are slowly bringing into existence, but how many seasons away it is, I cannot tell. A pinprick took me out of the world, but dreams flow me back in, a world of proof and hope in my hands, guided by the astonished feel of your lips on mine. Somehow, you and I are the universe's open hands, filling each other with each other. We are a prequel to a longer tale. The servants are still waking. They don't know what the future holds. Guards are still slumped against the wall in parts of the castle. But in this room, the future is born. Such freedoms did exist, and will. We will be a part of it, awake and alive, with no sharp spindles to block our way.
Awesome!
Yes, you do. I'm really glad you like that.
and then, wow, we're going to get to know each other better.
That's the part that wasn't in the story.
I know.
But if you go to my website, which is marissacohen.com, and scroll on back through, and it'll probably be in the slideshow. Mm-hmm. There are individual question and answer information about both Awake and Seastone. Mm-hmm. And so people can go and read a bit more about how Awake was created and why it mattered to me to tell that story.
Do you know what? It actually took me to one of the final images in the sequel to Spanish Pearl. And it's when they're in a parapet and have opened up the door, and when they're Lewis is taking her clothes off and hanging them up, she no longer has to wrap her breasts because she's been outed.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh. And then, her lover was like, how did I get naked? What?
That's such a great scene, because the whole build-up with Lewis is that's almost like a modern day comparison to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I mean, that's what I was reminded of when I was reading those books, was just her struggle to sort of stay in not just what we would consider a closet, but to stay in a male role for her life, to save her own life, and because that was who she was just really, really, really moving. I thought it was really
also good. She wanted to be a soldier. It was who she is. She's good at it. She's a good leader, and she would not be able to live that life if it were not for the way that she did it. Although she's outed awfully. Here's not a good thing when it happens, but it ends up being for the best, because she's still La Picadora, mm-hmm. Who, even when they thought that she was a man, she was known by that name because she was good with knives.
Right.
So La Picadora is when it's like a stick with a poker on it that they would use to enrage the bulls. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it doesn't happen within the context of this story, but that's where the name comes from.
Oh, that's cool. That's interesting to Enrage the Bulls, because she was kind of, I lost my train of thought. I was trying to make a comparison between that and sort of what she was doing and how she was sort of right under the wire, like really.
Exactly. And she said, I can't overpower somebody with my sword, just because no matter how strong she is, she's not going to have as much weight and muscle behind her as a man. So what she would do is fix it so that the swords were clashing overhead, and she would reach and get her dagger, and many times kill somebody by a dagger rather than within a sword fight.
Such a great series.
Woohoo! Yes.
Yay, Catherine Friend.
Yay, Catherine
Read
Friend. I'm always so fascinated by that, by gender bending or passing, and the Sword of the Guardian is so fucking cool. And if you like fantasy, there is a magical element to it.
Yeah, that's a wonderful book, and there's actually a novel that I just discovered. It's called When Women Were Warriors.
Oh, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Catherine, it's on my Kindle, Catherine something. But there's a series of 3, and the closest thing I could describe it to would be like Mists of Avalon, only as if the entire thing was lesbian, which we all want it to be anyway.
Yes, I love lesbian fantasy land, where everybody's a lesbian, or at least all the fun ones are.
Right. It's all Xena all the time.
Exactly.
So good.
That would be a great t-shirt. All Xena, all the time.
That's what happens in my head all the time.
You know what though? Like maybe because of my size, because I'm 5'8", but I identify so much more with Xena than I do with Gabrielle. I would find Gabrielle infinitely annoying.
Oh, I love her. I admit, I feel like in my life I've dated more the Xenas, and I like Gabrielle later. I don't like her when she's like tripping over rocks. It's when she's trying to make a point, but I like her as she becomes the Amazon Queen, and like as she starts to. Yes,
because like for me, I never watched the series because at the time I was too cool for school. I was a baby dyke, and everybody was supposed to watch Xena and love it, and I'm like, fuck you all, I'm not gonna watch Xena. And then I became friends with Angie from the Cocktail Hour, and she introduced me to Conqueror fiction, which I am so for.
Yeah.
Oh, Conqueror fiction is awesome. And also my minor was ancient and Greek and Roman myth and religion.
Yummy stuff.
Yeah. So I always was really into that time period, so it really gets me all revved up. Not that I wouldn't, have a tryst with Xena. I wouldn't turn her down.
Yeah, no, of course not.
But I identify with her so much more. And, although I'm not a stoic, tortured person who needs saving.
She's very Heathcliff, and a lot of and there are some awesome fanfic out there. There is just Nene Adams, who I loved, wrote sort of Xena and Gabrielle turned Sherlock Holmes and Watson, kind of, and amazing stuff. Melissa Good, who actually lives about a mile from me, and it's all I can do to not show up at her house and be like, hi.
That would be excellent. I'm a fan of yours, and you're awesome. Can we hang out?
Right. And she really does live in my best friend's neighborhood, and I so want to be like, hi there. No, don't do it. No, don't. Bad. But
well, you need to go to GCLS. Then you probably bump into her.
I hope. One day.
Over the rainbow.
I live in South Florida, and so the books that she writes take place in Miami, and basically it's Xena and Gabrielle as computer programmers, and of course they're ridiculously wealthy, and they live on Star Island, and they have a seemingly unlimited income all the time, and they're in love and awesome and glamorous and solving mysteries, and it's so fluffy fun. It's just, it's great.
Yeah, fan fiction is some kind of awesome, I'll tell you.
It is, and what's really cool is there are so many authors who got their start through fic. I mean, Radcliffe,
yes.
A.G. McGregor, Karen Kalmacher, like all this sort of, biggies.
Found they cut their teeth in fan fiction.
And a lot of them, was Uberfic, which is, I sound like I'm such a geek, Liz. This is how it comes out on your show. Uberfic is, I'm guessing you know what.
Well, Xena fan fiction, if it's taking in the same time period and whatnot that you've seen in the show, it's traditional Xena fan fiction. If it's Uber fan fiction, that means that it's in modern times or in a time separate from the Xena thing going on.
Yes. And a lot of the Uberfic just became like all of the novels. Like I think Radcliffe has something like 30 or 40 novels out, and like a good deal of them were originally like just Uberfic that was printed on one of the websites. And I just think that's so awesome, because I remember being 18 and 19 and 20, just realizing that I was some kind of queer, but not really getting it entirely, and just up all hours on Academy of Bards, just reading everything I could get my hands on. And it's so cool that like so many years later, that's how all of these authors have,
found their way. And I love, this returns to what I've said a million times during this episode, is I love historical fiction. I love history, period. And I enjoy seeing different time periods come to life. And I like, the 20s or Victorian era, or, Patty Henderson, which I've had on the show twice, writes Gothic historicals.
Okay.
Which are awesome, except for one. Her Brenda Strange series is modern, but it's like going into these, crumbling former beautiful castles and whatnot, and the sour and dour people who were at one point very wealthy, but something's happened to them.
That's great. There was a book. The book is called Lily of the Tower, and Bella published it a couple years ago. And I think Elizabeth Hart is the author. She's a buddy of mine on Facebook, and it's basically a lesbian version of Jane Eyre, which I grew up adoring, and it's really good. And then there's another one, Rebecca S. Buck, who did Ghosts of Winter and Truths, and she does a lot of sort of time-jumping love stories.
Yes.
Which, are like, it'll switch cut from like present day to 19th century, and
she was story. Like, I think the flip back and forth for one of them, and I can't think of the title right now, is where the modern day character is dressing up as a what do they call when they're working in a prison? I can't think of it.
Oh yeah, that was Truths. She's working in a she's like a reenactment.
Yeah, she reenacts, and I can't, I'm like, it's not a governess. It's like playing not Pictionary. It's like, what am I talking about? Anyway, so like the woman who would be in charge of looking after the prisoners and, going around and making sure everybody's where they're supposed to be. And there was a flip back and forth for that one. And yes. So in general, I dig this stuff. I love delving into these histories, and it's also fun for me to see how life was like, or how life could have been like, in let's say the Wild West, which Radcliffe wrote Innocent Hearts, which is great.
Yep, and the sequel, Promising Hearts, also good.
Yes, also great. Yes, agreed. I like Promising Hearts best. I
totally did too. I really feel you on that.
Yeah, no, I like that May found love in the Doctor, and they both were imperfect, yet they loved each other. That's, I do like the sequel, but the first one is just so beautiful. It has that, westward movement where, bright-eyed and excited she was, and she didn't miss Boston society. She wanted something new and wanted to live outside of the preordained. If you come from money, you're expected to marry somebody of means and then spend your time hosting parties and tea and knitting and shit. And
Right. And what an awesome way to totally subvert the cultural norm. You know, like, I love how it just fits in there. Like, if you want to rebel against first-class society and you really want to, like, turn the entire thing on its head, the perfect forbidden lover is, of course, a lesbian. What's so nice about these stories is you get the beginning of feminism, and you get a way to completely, you know, flip the social order completely on its head. So you get to be in the 19th century and put women at the forefront. And I think that's a part of history that we really haven't seen in, you know, the usual fairly straight-minded textbooks that we get every day in school, or that we see all the time as pop culture. And what's important is that, I mean, there were women who did cross-dress, who did live their lives, you know, either as men or as lesbians, or, you know, that existed as part of our history. And I think that's so great that it shows up in fiction, and I just also think it's hot.
Yes. And you know, I like that it comes up in fiction because of what you just said. There were people who lived this way, and I'm sure, even though it doesn't get into the history books, that there were people who were lesbians who were accepted because of their abilities. For in the same way in Innocent Hearts, the rancher was phenomenal at what she did. She's very good at all the different aspects of running a ranch, and she's got great horses, and people want to work with her, and she's kind and fair. And the men who work on her ranch are good men who watch their behavior, and she even tells them, you know, remember that you're representing my ranch. You know, when they have the roundup and they're finally in the city and they can avail of prostitutes if they so desire.
Right.
But they have to remember, you know, who they are, and if somebody is not honorable, she will no longer work with them, which I kind of like that.
Yeah, she was a really good character. And I also think what's so... I've been actually doing a lot of research into women like that because I'm working on a project that has to do with the Civil War. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple of really great books about women who cross-dressed as soldiers and went to fight for the Union or for the Confederacy. And one is called They Fought Like Demons, mm-hmm. I think is what it's called. And then there's a woman called Sarah Edmonds Edwards. And people can Google her if they want to. And she was basically a Union spy.
Oh, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Like, we don't have evidence that she was gay, but she, I believe, was pretty much, you know, dressed as a soldier for, I think almost the entire war. And we have evidence of women who were cross-dressing to be soldiers, to either be, you know, close to their husbands who went to war, or maybe possibly because they were gay, we don't know, but there are a lot of women like that who throughout history.
Well,
and Lillian Baderman writes a lot about that too.
Yeah, women's history is important history, even if, you know, they aren't as lucky as we are to be lesbitarians.
Lesbitarians, that's great. This is fun.
Yes, indeedy. So before we go too far afield, we have a third and final story. Can you set that up for me?
Oh, I'd be delighted to. So I've been working on this story on and off since I was 16 years old. It's been through the rounds with friends. It's really never seen the light of day before, so this is a really big, special moment for me. It's an excerpt from a novel called Morgan and Jane. Mm-hmm. And basically, it's about two women in the present day who wind up having dreams/nightmares about the women they were in Renaissance times. And one was the daughter of the manor. Her name was Morgan. And Jane was the girl who worked in the kitchen, who was essentially, you know, farmed out by relatives and what have you, and through a series of events comes to work in the kitchen of the manor, and eventually goes to seek her fortune as a pirate. And there's a lot of things to do with gods and goddesses who regularly just hang out with these characters. The Indian god Ganesh, who is the little elephant god, who's the god of luck and writing, shows up in this story a lot as a guide. So it's very cross-genre. It's a historical, but it also has a lot of fantasy elements. And it's sort of like the short stories I read earlier, a little dark, a little twisted, a little, skewed. And I'm really, really happy to read it on your show, Liz.
Yay! So please start your reading.
Spinning straw into gold is the intersection of our desires and hearts. Our brain has no place in this. That's what old Kath taught me. Some called her witch. I would sneak to her house when I was a girl, my heart pounding, from the time I was 3. She would sit me on her knee and hold me on her legs and her tattered greenish skirts. This is the way of the world, she would tell me. You follow your heart and you spin your straw. You make your heart from your blood, she would say. She looked at me, seeing me for the first time. My girl's hair was hacked into the neatest boy style that I could manage. Even at 16, I knew what I was. I had never worn anything gentle or soft, but instead delighted in the rough homespun of my brother's clothes. He didn't mind, or said he didn't, and even passed them to me carefully before the same illness that would eventually take my mother took him too. I didn't know what the witch meant for a long time. How could one follow one's heart and spin straw? How did one make her heart from her own blood if one's heart was a part of you? My mother and I lived by the old tree and up the road from the burrow in those days. My father had run off when we were kids, and then my brother took sick. The flu dropped on the house like a bad cloud, and within 2 days he was dead. It seemed that only I, fortified by old Kath's potions, was saved. That was my luck, it seemed, both good and bad. Good because my friendship with old Kath had saved me. Bad, in that my family was not spared, and I was. My mother had never said a word against my boyish ways. In fact, from the time she was brushing her long blonde hair by the river when I was a babe, she'd been the one to tie my hair back into a plait and tuck it in my shirt and call me John, even though she christened me Jane Sarah by it. The Jane was for her mother, who had died in childbed, and the Sarah was for my mother's own name. Together the two meant merciful princess, but Mama claimed that the Sarah part meant spirit, and she said I had it every time she tucked my hair beneath my shirt, or when she finally hacked my hair off just under my jawline, or the dozens of times she mended my elbows and knees when I slammed into the ground. I was not prepared to lose my mother the way I did. I knew she had the flu because the flu changes people. It changed her into hating me and the pants I wore. When I came home that day with the water bucket in my hand, the only part of me that felt like me was my legs long in my dead brother's stolen trousers. The rest of me felt swollen and frightened, as though the real me had hidden far below my face and was silent, afraid of talking, because what new disaster could strike now? Devil's child, a voice hissed. The voice sounded like my mother. It came from her body, now wasted and covered over with scabs and sick. It was not my mother, but sounded like her and smelt like her. Devil's child, she yelled, her hands twisting against the thin sheet. You'll go to hell for dressing the way you do. I crept up to her bed and tried to hold her hands and make her drink water, but she would have none of it. She sweated and shouted and screamed. I ran into the forest. I repeated like a banshee, "What do I do? What do I do?" I yelled it again and again. My voice scraped itself against sound. The sun was hot on my flesh, but I couldn't feel it. I begged for her life. I begged for my own, because when mothers die, when do the daughters go? I ran to old Kath. She wrote my name on a slip and handed it to me. Keep it safe, she told me. It is your only option. Keep it close. Death will try to take it from you. Your mother will try to take it from you. My mother would never do that, I said, even as my mother's screams echoed in the trees behind me. She called my name, and for the first time in my life I quaked in my boots, because I knew my mother was not my mother. Old Kath considered me a long moment. Correct. Death, disguised as your mother, will try to take your life, she said. She coolly handed me the paper. I took it. I squinted at my name and at the thin ink that formed the letters that told myself back to me. The ink smelled pungent, made as it was from a mixture of dirt and milk. It smelled of hard earth and all the seeds that grew deep down. It smelled of richness and cream and clarity, simplicity of form. I folded the paper into my shoe top and hurried home. When I swung open the door, my mother was not my mother. She had torn all my books and the pages were everywhere. Where have you been? She hissed. Where? Death will look like your mother. It is not your mother, I heard old Kath. Do not let death take your life. I remembered those words as keenly as I remembered my mother's face, loving and kind, looming over me when I was a child. Death had made my mother's hands cracked and swollen. The hands that held me and stroked my face 1,000 times, the lips that had kissed my face and told me that I was her best hope in the world, were raw and scraped. Nothing of her remained. "Mama," I whispered, but I brought out my old hunting knife. I wept to use it, but she drove her body into it when she tried to rip my throat from my body. I had no choice, but it was her or me, and in the end, I would not let myself die because life had turned my beloved mother into a wild thing who wanted to eat me because I wore trousers. When she died, light came out of her body, and her bones seemed to become dust. The light streamed through the house, first left, then right, as if deciding where to go, and it came right at me. It slammed into my breastbone and knocked me down. When I woke, I knew that my mother was safe inside me. At first. The pain came later. I went the next morning to tell old Kath that she was right. She pulled me to her and stroked the scratches on my face. Oh, girl, what did she do? I shook my head and buried my face in old Kath's shoulder. She smelled of rosemary from her garden, and she pulled me inside her cabin. Her cabin was just as warm and nurturing as it had been the day before. Nothing had changed. She soothed and sat me down, pushing a warm bowl of potato soup into my hands. "Now then, love," she began, "where's the body?" I started. "How could you know?" "Darling girl, I know what such illnesses do. You've not only scratches on your face, but your hands as well. She tried to take you into death with her. That's the nature of the fever, to choose something about you they once loved and then try to kill you for it." I nodded. The floor swam in front of me. I yawned so hard that my jaw cracked and my brain became a hazy ocean where the slightest thoughts were waterlogged and confusing. I resurfaced long enough to hear something of what old Kath said. "They'll take you in. Just keep your hair short." "Keep my what? Why? But I want to live with you." Old Kath smiled at me and stretched her hand across the wooden table. Frowning, I took it. "Jane, it's best you go away for a time. Folks around these parts will understand. They know the fever. Mrs. Charlotte from up the road lost her boy, and same thing, coughing, fever, and then one night he came at her. She had no choice, you see. Only she wanted him with a log. She wasn't lucky enough to have a hunting knife on hand." I swallowed. The image of my mother running into my knife and her hot blood pouring over my hands was too much for me to bear with my eyes open. I closed them and pressed my fingertips into them. "So then why do I have to go away? I can't." "Because it's best. I can't. I won't, and you cannot force me." "Jane, dear girl, no," I stood shaking. "That's my home. I can't leave my home." "We're getting off track," dismissed old Kath. "Where's your mum's body?" I swallowed. "Home?" My shocked mind provided the rest of the details. Her legs splayed, her once lovely face covered in blood, her blood that I'd spilt. Her finely made hands, so like mine, opened. Old Kath knelt in front of me, and her usual smell of old beans, earth, and something far older and denser came up from the crush of her skirts. "Finish your soup," she said, pulling a sack and shovel from behind the door, "and we'll plan later." The moon wasn't full yet, but it was high in the sky as it was going to be once old Kath and I began the half-mile walk to the cabin. Once there, old Kath muttered something and spat on the doorstep. "What's that?" I said. "Oh, lost spirits, all go home. Be not afraid. Be in the great woman's hand," she repeated, and swung the door open wide. "What's there?" I squeaked, peeking around her. "Nothing but shadows, lass, nothing but shadows. And see, there your mum still lays." She pointed, and there was my mother lying in a stinking heap. I began to shake then, as if all my bones decided to wrench themselves loose at once. "I'll let you choose. Would you rather dig the pit or tend the body?" The body. My mother was once followed by several different men, each trailing her and teasing her throughout the village, claiming they were all three bewitched by her deep brown eyes and thoughtful expression. Now, I turned my head, willing myself to ignore this smelly mess. I gagged, and embarrassingly and unceremoniously vomited by the foot of my neat little bed. "Best dig, then," old Kath said, regarding me wryly. "Here." She pushed the shovel into my hands, pushed me outside, and firmly shut the door. An hour later, I was covered in dirt and tears, straining to hear anything through the door, but the small house was silent. No wailing or praying came from inside, just a deep silence. The pit I had dug yawned open in front of me. Old Kath opened the door. She then turned and bent down, bearing the corpse of my mother in her arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. "What should I—" "Tell the story of her life," said old Kath. And before I knew it, I held my mother. I told the story of her life the best I knew. I told that she was daughter to a merchant and a lovely mother, that she married my father, that my father died and left her and my older brother. that she was a great one for tales. She could spin a tale of mermaids and magical creatures as real as were owls and trees. That she loved me for my boyish ways, and not in spite of them. That she was kind and gave me books to read, and that we pored over maps together, dreaming of other lands. That she was fierce when the need called for it, like when she stabbed the wolf in the paw when it tried to claw me when I was a child. That she was my anchor, that she was stardust and firelight and the love of the goddess, and that the earth should hold her, for I no longer could. I hadn't realized that I was sobbing until old Kath gently took her from my arms and laid her in the ground. We dug over her somberly, and then old Kath opened her lips and sang, a great wail of a song. Her voice grew large and seemed to weep and plead and sigh, and I heard no words save for circle and great mother. At the end of it, old Kath walked to me and put her arms around me, a great bear holding her terrified cub. Tomorrow, she said, we prepare you for life at the manor.
Dun dun dun.
What will happen now?
You're gonna meet a hot chick at the manor. With really long hair, most likely, and fine clothes, and skin soft and lovely, you know, and bodices and whatnot.
There are bodices, but Morgan's often kind of forced into them. She's not really a bodice type girl. She's muddy a lot of the time.
But there's always the opportunity for bodice ripping when there's bodice wearing.
And there is bodice ripping, although maybe not a lot of bodice wearing, but there is bodice ripping, I promise.
Oh, that's great news, Marissa. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed my time with you this evening, and I'm so glad that you took time to read your 3 stories.
This has been such a pleasure, Liz. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great. What a blast.
I know. Totally good fun. Thanks again for coming on.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.